Hello, wonderful human beings, and welcome back to a new video. My name is Evelyn Barta, and those of you that are new to my channel, welcome to my channel. I'm happy to have you here. Those of you that have been already here, then welcome back. In today's video, I want to talk about a thing that is very important in today's society, because we can say that the whole society is being led by narcissism, by this win-lose game, win-lose scenario. And in order to understand how to deal with that and how to create another reality for ourselves and how to choose a path that is not divergent, we need to understand what are the flaws of our current reality. Someone has brought up narcissism in the comment section and said that it would be interesting to know about the spiritual meaning and the esoteric meaning of narcissism, which is a real problem in our society right now. And that is a great question, because really that is the basis of our systems right now. So the systems that are in place at this very moment are being built on this win-lose game, on this narcissistic worldview. And in order to develop discernment and in order to navigate through this reality, we need to understand how it all started, how we have arrived to this current reality, and how we can change things. How we can change things that our ancestors probably didn't want to change or didn't know how to change. And if we think about the non-linearity of time, and we think about the reincarnation process, and we understand what time travel is also and what timelines are, because in order to understand what timelines are, right, we need to understand that time travel is actually possible. So we can say that our ancestors are actually us. And by understanding this process of how a narcissistic person, and I'm talking about narcissism, quote unquote, because I don't like to use that label, it's just a label. So how narcissism is being developed. And by understanding that, we can heal our ancestors that are actually us. And we can heal future versions of ourselves as well that are divergent versions that did not pass the initiation. So I will get into that more later on in today's video, so you will understand what I'm trying to say here. So let's talk about narcissism and the word, the label narcissistic, narcissism. Narcissist is being thrown around, and it's almost like being used as a weapon against those that don't share the same opinion as us. So I have seen that in groups as well. People being called narcissistic just because they are showing characteristics that are more self-loving and putting themselves in the first place. So it can have a distorted meaning as well. And that's why I love to avoid that particular word, that particular label, because what we are considering narcissist, even narcissistic personality disorder, is really just a coping mechanism, is really just a mechanism of adaptation. So what are the roots of narcissistic personality disorder? First of all, let's clarify that self-love is not equal with selfishness. So self-love, unfortunately, is being associated with narcissism, but that is not correct, because self-love is love. Self-love is respect, so it's love for oneself, when selfishness is rooted in lack, is rooted in lack mindset, is fear, so it's the opposite of love. So it could not be further away from self-love. It's actually the opposite of that. So what we consider narcissistic, a narcissistic behavior, is when a person is only considering their own best interest. They are only being concerned about their own well-being, their own interest, and their own welfare as well, regardless of how they are impacting others. So it's rooted in the win-lose mindset, because there's not enough to go around. Then I need to win, but in order for me to win, the other person has to lose, and I don't care about the other person losing as long as I am winning. So that is the mindset of a narcissistic person. So it's about taking resources, taking energy, because that is the only way for me to take away something from the other person. And if I take away something from the other person, that other person is losing. And that's the only way for me to have something. And I'm not giving anything in return. So it's a parasitic way, it's a parasitic thinking, and is really rooted in the lack mentality. It's an inner starvation. So the person that is narcissistic, a person that is only taking away, is really starving inside of them. But what are those dynamics in the childhood that are leading to this narcissistic behavior of a child? Because this is trauma, this is a trauma response. This is a coping mechanism, and as I said, it's an adaptation mechanism. And it is extremely important for us to understand how this trauma response works and how a person can heal that. Because if this trauma is not being dealt with, is not being healed, then it's easy to go down, and then individually can easily go down a degenerate path, a divergent path. So from a more spiritual and esoteric perspective, this is how the person goes down a degenerate path, because that unhealed trauma accumulates lifetime after lifetime. So how does a child start developing narcissistic tendencies, narcissistic characteristics, basically? So a child that is growing up as a narcissist is always having narcissistic parents as well. And most of the time, the parent is having a fantasy in their mind about the child's behavior. So they are having an idea in their mind about how the child should behave. And most of the time, the children are extensions of the parent. So they are being used as extensions of the parent's personality. And in that case, the real personality of a child is being completely ignored, is not being respected. And because of that, the child cannot meet those expectations, cannot live up to those fantasies. So it cannot conform to the fantasies of the parent either. And because of that, the parent is considering the child as a threat. The child in the subconscious mind of the parent is being seen as a threat. So therefore, the parent verbally and non-verbally as well is labeling the child as ungrateful and as selfish. And because we are living in a world of mirroring and everything is a projection, the parent is projecting their own narcissism on the child. And because they have some unhealed trauma, so the parent has some unhealed trauma related to selfishness, which came from their own parents, that's why they are projecting that selfishness, which is in them, onto the child, and they are labeling the child as selfish. So we can say that they have already labeled the child as a narcissist, even though that happened non-verbally. So they see the child as selfish, they see the child as ungrateful, and they are even verbalizing that many times. So what the child receives as a message from their parents is that they are unlovable, they are unworthy of their parents' love, and therefore they cannot attach to that parent figure. They cannot attach to a parent, they cannot attach to an adult, they cannot trust adults in general, and therefore they cannot trust the world and people in general. The world is unsafe, so that is the worldview that they are forming. The world is unsafe, everybody is out for their own. Love is not free, it cannot be free, so they have to manipulate other people in order to get that love, in order to get what they want. And that is the mentality on which our society is being built upon right now. It is built upon this narcissistic view. But what we have to know about this narcissism is that it's the most painful trauma that one can ever experience. And this worldview and this trauma is extremely painful because it's built on lack. It's built on lack of love. It's an inner starvation. So an individual that is starving inside of them, they will be able to manipulate, they will be able to lie with no shame in order to get what they want. So they are playing the win-lose game, they are playing the zero-sum game as well. And it doesn't matter who is being hurt in the process. And what we need to know about narcissism is that it's also in denial. So a narcissistic person will never say that they are narcissistic. They will never see those characteristics in themselves, because in order to see those characteristics, they need to face their inner world, and that is too painful. So we are talking about trying to avoid pain with all costs, and we are talking about repressed trauma here as well. and a lack of intimacy and a lack of connection with other people, because the connection with other people also is being associated with not being worthy or not being lovable. They are associating the connection, and we are always doing that. We are associating our intimate relationships, our intimate connections with our connections to our parents. And that is why a narcissistic person is unable to stay in intimate relationships, is unable to form intimacy. So intimacy is extremely, extremely painful here. And there's an avoidance of that pain with all costs, as I said. So the person it has been suppressing and repressing that pain for such a long time, and that trauma for such a long time, therefore the intimacy for such a long time, that they are unable to connect to that intimacy. And that is why it's so hard to heal that aspect, that narcissistic aspect. That is why it's so hard to heal a narcissism, because the first step of healing something, of healing of a trauma, is to recognize that is there. The only thing that they will see is a projection of themselves in the external world and in others. So that's why I always say that those people are actually very dangerous, that are seeing these shadows aspects as narcissism in others, but they are never recognizing those traits in themselves. So narcissism is a spectrum. We all have those tendencies in us. We all have selfishness. And a world that is completely selfless, a life that is selfless, is impossible. You cannot be selfless. How many of you have ever looked at a child, your own children as well, maybe, or other people's children? How many of you can say that you have never seen how selfish those children are? And if you are seeing selfishness in the child, then it means that you are having it in yourself as well. So you are having some narcissistic traits as well. So you understand that narcissism is a label. So psychology is putting people into different categories and different boxes based on how they are dealing with their own pain, what coping mechanisms they developed in order to lessen their pain that comes from their trauma, that comes from their childhood. And in the case of the narcissist, the lessening the pain is by avoiding pain, by suppressing pain, and by repressing pain, and avoiding love and denying love, and therefore denying connection to others. And when you deny your connection to others, you deny your connection to God. And this is how we are arriving to the esoteric and the spiritual meaning behind narcissism, and how these entities, how these lower astral beings are actually deeply traumatized entities. These beings are having a very distorted consciousness, a very fragmented consciousness that is rooted in this childhood trauma. And as I said, when you don't heal that trauma, when you don't face the karma as well and the trauma itself, then it gets worse and worse, lifetime after lifetime. So if we want to think about this reincarnation cycle, then we can say that the entity has this very distorted, very fragmented consciousness, and therefore they don't recognize love. They don't see love. They only see the lack of love. So they consider love being a fairy tale, being a fantasy. And therefore, they also say that God himself is a fantasy, is a fairy tale. How many times we are hearing these entities that are only focused on this scientific materialism, saying that God is only a creation of the mind. So because of that fragmentation, there's an avoidance of pain. And that is why in the first place, the fragmentation happened, for the child to avoid pain. And when you avoid pain, then over time, incarnation after incarnation, your emotional body is being damaged. So after a while, the emotional body is almost like non-existent. This is what happened with the Greys, for example. This is what this degenerate path is about. This divergent timeline is about. These divergent entities don't have an emotional body. So they have to make up with their brain, and they're focusing on the mind purely. So when you disconnect from your emotional body because it's too hard to be connected there, it's too painful because you have to face your trauma, you have to face your karma. So you disconnect from the emotional body. Then when you go through the transformational process of death, the death of the physical body, the soul is unable to get past the moon lock. There is a destroyed emotional body. The entity hasn't put in the spiritual work of the transmutation of their own karma and trauma because they don't want to face it. Now they will come back, and they will come back to parents that will reinforce that trauma, but they will reinforce much denser version of that trauma, and it's getting denser and denser and denser. So the entity, the soul, has an opportunity in the next lifetime to recognize that trauma in themselves. But because it's getting harder and harder and denser, it will be harder and harder also to recognize. And it will get more difficult to heal as well. And that is how an entity goes down a divergent path, a degenerate path, when they constantly want to avoid to face their karma. But the thing is that the emotional body gets so damaged and the human itself gets so mutated over time. And we are talking about in the future as well, like future versions of humans that went down that transhumanist path and got so degenerated that at some point the only way is to go to the eighth sphere. And this is what they want to avoid, because if they have to go through that reincarnation process from the very beginning, then the only way is to face their karma and their trauma, and that is extremely, extremely painful. And that is what transhumanism is about. They want to avoid that, and they think that if they merge themselves with the machines, if they alter certain things and they replace certain things with artificial intelligence, they replace the human emotions with artificial intelligence, that will solve their problems. They even try to alter the moon. And that is why they have many attempts in altering the moon, and they tried to make it artificial to avoid the moon lock. However, they are unable to do that. They cannot do that. They cannot just alter nature without backfiring the whole thing on them. So there's a propaganda around the moon as well being artificial, but in reality, the moon is not artificial, is natural. It's a planetary body, but they are trying to make it artificial in order to avoid the moon lock. So how these degenerate beings of these divergent timelines are being created is first mutating the mind. There's a mutation, there's a distortion that is happening in the mind. And there's this denying of God and denying of love, as I said, which is essentially the main characteristic of a narcissistic person. It's the lack of love. But I'm calling it narcissism for the sake of understanding this particular trauma. So first the mind mutates. And this is how these entities are becoming psychopathic. And they start believing that they are gods. And there's this feeling of superiority about them, this feeling of being superior and other people being inferior compared to them, this feeling of being able to rule the world, to control all the planets, to control all the solar system, to control other worlds, being able to colonize other worlds if we want, being able to merge ourselves with other creatures, with animals, or hybridizing animals, this obsession with eugenics, merging different species of animals together and merging them with humans as well, and merging the machines with humans as well. So this is how these degenerate species were created, these weird creatures of the reptilians, for example, or different species that are interdimensional species. So there are some timelines where this gets very weird and very scary as well. So it's not only the mutation of the emotional body, mutation of the mind as well, by denying God, by denying emotions. But at some point, it can get to the mutation of the human body as well, by this obsession with DNA, this obsession with merging different species together. So it's about the controlling of nature, the controlling of the world, and developing the mind purely. But the mind is incapable of initiation. The mind is really powerless in and of itself without the emotional body. And therefore, these degenerate beings are being stuck, which I talked many times about the fourth dimension. They are stuck on that level. They cannot go higher than that. And their own universe is revolving around the fourth dimension. They think that that is the only world. That is the whole universe. And if they are creating portals by using their technology in that fourth dimension, they think that they are the rulers of that universe. They think that they are the overlords. They think that they have the right to rule over certain planets. And by using their time travel technology, they really messed up, and now they are trying to correct their mistakes. So they think that this fourth dimension is all of the universe, and they aren't aware of higher dimensions because they don't have an emotional body. How can they be aware of higher dimensions? They cannot perceive higher dimensions. And because of this scientific materialism, they only believe in what they can see. So they are not perceiving higher dimensions, because for that you need emotions, you need intuition as well. You need the heart. You need heart-centeredness in order to perceive higher dimensions. They cannot do that. So these divergent civilizations and interdimensionals like the Greys had their calculations wrong about their transhumanist agenda, their path. They had their ratio wrong. And they mutated themselves to a degree that they did not evolve together with their planet. They did not evolve together with the Earth. So therefore, they are part of a timeline where Earth has destroyed itself because they were not able to evolve together with the Earth. Not only they destroyed themselves and degenerated themselves, so they are unable to reproduce, but they destroyed the planet as well. So their only option is to use their time travel technology and to come back and to correct their mistake. But because they don't have the emotional body and they don't have the wisdom of the heart, I talked about this already in previous videos, they want to correct their mistake with the same methods. They're using the same methods that led to their destruction. So they want to correct it by using technology and using eugenics and manipulating the human DNA. Otherwise, they will have to face their karma and they will have to go to the 8th sphere. So this is what it means having this trauma of narcissism. And again, that is just a label, but that is that specific trauma that it makes an individual to turn their back to God, to turn their back to love. So that is why I wanted to link narcissism with the degenerate timelines, the divergent timelines, because there is a direct correlation there. So the first mutation is internal, is happening in the mind, is the sickness of the mind by denying the emotions, by denying love. And the energy of these entities is being generated through domination over other entities, the manipulation of other entities, manipulation of humankind. That is why we are living in a domination-based system, in a domination-based society, because those that think that are ruling this world and are thinking that are the dominant species are having this domination mindset or having this narcissistic mindset. So what led to these entities destroying themselves and destroying the planet as well on a particular timeline? So we are talking about future timelines here, and many are available actually. But one of those degenerate timelines, there is a destruction. There's a destruction process. And what led to it is the mindset of wanting to play God and wanting to dominate over nature. And you cannot play God with nature. You have to align with nature. That is the only way. Otherwise, the whole thing backfires on you. You cannot terraform a planet without knowing how this process works. You cannot just place some entities on a particular planet and think that it will all work well. No. Entities, animals, plants, life on a particular planet grows together with the planet, goes in sync with the consciousness of the planet. So our consciousness and evolution happens in a synchronized way with our planet. This is the only way. You cannot just move around and colonize different planets and think that it will be fine. No, that leads to destruction. And this is what they want to do with Mars without realizing that they are playing with fire again. They are replicating their own destruction. So that is the difference between these degenerate beings and lower astral beings. They always base their systems and their societal structures on a particular planet on domination. on the win-lose game. Lower beings want to convince you to choose a particular path, to choose their path. They want to manipulate you into choosing a particular timeline, a timeline that is fitting their own agenda. When the exalted beings, the higher dimensional beings, the higher human forms, which are interdimensional and are also in contact with us, will never do that in a manipulative way, will never want to convince you to choose a particular timeline. They will let you choose. They will let you choose your own timeline, your own path. That is the difference. They will never say to you that you need to get a particular inoculation, a particular vaccine in order to have this and that and that. And if you don't do that, you will not have those particular things. Those things will be denied from you. They will never do that. So we have to ask ourselves, what is a higher dimensional being? What is a love-based society? What are love-based structures? And if those structures and systems that we have in place right now are love-based or not. And I think the answer is quite evident here, that they are not. They are not rooted in love. They are rooted in fear, in force, in manipulation. They are not respecting your free will and your sovereignty. The answer is very evident. And this is the first step of avoiding to go down a divergent path, a degenerate path. A degenerate path that we are already seeing in front of our eyes forming. That transhuman path is forming in front of our eyes. But then the organic path is forming as well. So it is time for this initiation of discernment. We are going through an initiation of discernment right now to discern which one is the path for us. So how do we deal with avoiding these paths? I mean, how we are avoiding these paths and how we are dealing with this narcissism, with this societal narcissism. First of all, we have to recognize narcissism in ourselves as well. We have to understand it deeply. And we cannot integrate fractured versions of ourselves if we don't recognize it. So that is the first step. We have to sit with it. We have to work with it. And we have to understand our trauma. That is the most important step of integration. And some of us are having an easier time in discerning energy, in developing discernment and going through this discernment process. And that is because as we are becoming more cosmic as a society, we are developing this cosmic society and cosmic citizenship, so to speak. We are starting to remember fallen aspects of ourselves. So we are able to connect to future and past versions of us. And before humanity approaching this golden age, we were less cosmic. Therefore, we were able to connect to more human aspects of us. So what is happening now with becoming more cosmic? We are adding another layer to the understanding of ourselves. So therefore, we are adding a divergent layer to ourselves as well. And this is how we are connecting to those versions of us, those fallen versions of us that have taken the divergent path, that have taken the transhumanist path. We all have versions like that. We have all versions as well on the lower astral plane that we are able to connect to. And by connecting to those versions, we are feeling that it was wrong. We are feeling what is the difference between choosing that path that is fear-based and choosing a path that is love-based. So we have to connect to those feelings, how it feels. How does it feel to live a life that is based on the heart, that is based on heart-centeredness? And really to feel the difference between this path, the organic one, and the inorganic one, which is the fear-based one. And where did the mindset come from that led us to that transhumanist path? So really, like when you are developing discernment, and the more discernment you are developing, the more you are able to connect to these different timelines and understanding the difference. And by understanding the difference, you are developing more and more discernment as well. So it's a very interesting that goes both ways, that the more heart-centered you are, the more you are affirming to your heart, the more you are able to connect to these different versions of you. And the more you are able to understand what mindset led you down that particular path, what you were thinking, what you were feeling, what made you to go down that path, what energy you were looking for from that mindset, what holes you were trying to fill with that mindset. So that is why it's very important to understand narcissism, but not only understanding it by using the mind, but feeling into that trauma with the heart as well. So what is happening in our society right now and what humanity is going through is a purging process, is the clearing of all of the old energies, of all of the trauma, of all of the corruption that is still present in our societal structures. And this clearing and purging process is requiring us to say no, is involving the word no, saying no to corruption, saying no to these corrupt individuals, and affirming that these corrupt individuals, these corrupt leaders must be removed from power. Corrupt interdimensionals that we are connecting to and are trying to manipulate our thinking and mindset must be removed as well. We must develop discernment. We must not accept lower astral entities to live parasitically on Earth, to feed off our energy basically. So the initiation process is about being able to see where the darkness is and integrating that darkness and integrating those shadows, but also saying no to them and choose the highest version of us, to choose the highest choice. And what is the highest choice always? It's love. It's love that can create a compassionate but just social system. Our initiation, the human initiation, has to become a science. And we have to make it available for everyone. That help needs to become available for everyone. But in order for us to make it available, we have to see where the fragmentation is. We have to see what kind of trauma our society is being built upon. And that was the purpose of my video today. So guys, this is what I wanted to say today. I hope this message has resonated with you, and if it did, you can feel free to subscribe to my channel. You can also share this message with others. And then if you want to support my channel and you want to support my work, you can do it on Patreon. Check it out. Have a look at what I'm posting there. I'm doing group guidances, different readings on different topics. I'm doing podcasts as well and different discussions about what is happening in our society on the 3D level as well. So if you like those things, then you are more than welcome to join. And then those of you that are using Telegram, I have a channel there as well. So please join. I'm posting updates there too, and sometimes even readings. So you can find all the links down below in the description box. And then thank you so much everybody who is supporting my channel otherwise as well. Your donations, your contributions mean a lot to me, because without you I would not be able to do what I'm doing. So I'm very, very grateful. All right guys, take care everybody. Have a wonderful day, and I cannot wait to see you next time.